Mhm. Hi there, everybody. How are you? And Dolores says hi all and sharing. Thank you for sharing, Dolores. Kay says hi all. Great playlist at Biden's speech tonight. Glad you enjoyed the playlist. And Joanne says hi, Ev. And has a bunch of emojis to send to us. Avril says, check one, check two, all clear. Hiya, friends and newbies, welcome. And Avril says, check one, check two, all clear. Hiya, friends and newbies, welcome. And Joanne says, actually slept today. I think I have PTSD from 4 years of chaos. Avril says, I must admit I'm exhaling a bit better since Biden won. Joanne says, hi, Joe and Bonnie. And Rebecca McClaskey says, hello, Joe. Hi, Rebecca. And this array says, we did it. Yeah, we did do it. Avril says, same. We got Biden. Kay says, my daughter Amber used to sing Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down when she was very little. Laugh out loud. Okay, there's a lot to talk about, of course, because the results of the election were mixed. Okay, we certainly wanted Biden to win because now we can go on and fight him. And Rebecca says, I can't believe how relieved I feel. I expected some, but I was in tears. And but Joanne says, K. Clark Ryan, love TP. Okay. It was mixed, and we're going to see how mixed it was. I'm going to start by reminding you about my Patreon account, the link to which is below me and to my left. Anyway, I'm going to share the first piece I want to go through, which is a piece from David Sirota. And the title of it is A Lot Went Wrong for Democrats on Election Night. It's a Jacobin. It was written or published on November 4th. He probably had it all ready to go. It says there's still much we don't know, but we can take some key lessons from the elections last night. First, the weak economic message of the Democrats helped Trump. Second, the Lincoln Project embarrassed itself. A ton of grassroots money was set on fire. Third, Americans don't love Obamacare. And fourth, Democratic court strategy failed. So that's a very good summary of what went wrong. And let's look at these lessons, which David Sirota gleaned. David Sirota and Andrew Perez and Julia Rock, his colleagues at the Daily Poster, gleaned from public opinion data and election data, campaign finance data. First, the economic message. They say it hugely helped Trump because the ticket ran away from economic issues. It had position papers. These were pretty decent, but economic transformation was not a huge part of its public messaging. That failure helped Donald Trump, according to exit polls from Edison Research. Trump won 81% of the vote among the 1/3 of the electorate that listed the economy as its top priority. Even more amazing, Trump and Joe Biden equally split the vote among those whose priority is a president who, quote, cares about people like me. The classic survey question. It's amazing to think that Trump and Joe Biden equally split that vote. That means that Biden, with all the cliches he delivered during the campaign, did not persuade voters whose priority was a president who cared about people like them, who cared about people. I mean, can you imagine? How is it possible that people found Joe Biden or thought of Joe Biden as someone who cared less about them than Donald Trump? Who could care less about people than Donald Trump, or equally little? It's mind-boggling. But that's what the exit polls indicated. Two, there was the Lincoln Project. You know, the project for some Republicans to bring Biden Republicans into the tent, into the big tent, to create the Biden Republicans. It turned out to be an anti-Trump cash cow for the Republican consultants. They raised $40 million from MSNBC watching brunch liberals in just the last few months. And it's now set to launch a media brand off the idea that its GOP operatives, people like Steve Schmidt, are political geniuses. Their ads focused on trying to court disaffected Republican voters and attack Trump's character, as Biden loaded up the Democratic convention with GOP speakers. Yeah, you remember that? All those Republican speakers at the Democratic convention? What the hell was going on there? They had no space for Rashida Tlaib, okay, or Ilhan Omar, okay, or Ayanna Pressley. But they had a lot of space for people like John Kasich. Yes, they did. When polls during the summer showed the strategy wasn't working, Galaxy Brain Rahm Emanuel defended it to a national audience, insisting that 2020 would be the year of the Biden Republican. Now, survey data showed the strategy epically failed. Trump actually garnered even more support from GOP voters than in 2016. Indeed, Edison Research exit polls on Tuesdays found that 93% of Republican voters supported Trump, 3 percentage points higher than in 2016, according to numbers from the same firm. So here's the takeaway. There may be a lot of so-called never-Trump Republicans promoted in the media and in politics, but, quote, never Trump, unquote, Republicans are not a statistically significant group of voters anywhere in America. They basically do not exist anywhere outside of the Beltway or cable news green rooms, and after tonight's results, we shouldn't have to see them on TV or ever see their tweets ever again. As for the Lincoln Project's focus on trying to scandalize Trump's character, the exit polls found that the voters are far more concerned about policy issues than personality. In fact, 73% of voters said their candidates' positions on the issues were more important in their vote for president than their candidates' personal qualities. And yet, the Lincoln Project focused on attacking Trump's character and personal qualities, never on attacking his policies. Of course, they didn't turn any voters around. Why would that turn people around? I mean, the Republicans tolerated the most scandalous personality for 4 years. The grab him by the pussy guy for 4 years. Oh, God. 3, people don't love the Affordable Care Act. While it may have made short-term sense for Democrats to focus on the GOP's efforts to repeal protections for patients with pre-existing conditions, we Americans actually aren't particularly pleased with the Affordable Care Act at a moment when millions have lost health insurance and insurers' profits are skyrocketing because people can't or don't want to go to the doctor. Edison Research exit polls found that 52% of voters think the Supreme Court should keep Obamacare, while 43% said the court should overturn it. That's all. Only 52% of voters think the Supreme Court should keep Obamacare of those who voted. A Fox News voter analysis survey, which went to more than 29,000 people in all 50 states between October 26th and November 3rd, found similar numbers, but suggests the ACA support is fairly thin. 14% of people want to leave the law as is, while 40% of people would like to improve it. The same poll asked voters if they would support changing the healthcare system so that any American can buy into a government-run healthcare plan if they want to, also known as a public health insurance option. Found that 71% of people support the idea and only 29% oppose it. Although Biden and Senate Democrats both supported a public health insurance option plan, their campaigns and outside spending groups spent more time messaging around protecting the ACA. You know, we're going to protect the ACA. We're going to protect the ACA. Not, we're going to repeal the ACA and give you a public option plan instead, or give you a Medicare for All plan instead. The Kaiser Family Foundation's tracking poll has shown consistently middling support for the ACA and showed that during the summer COVID-19 burst, the law was underwater among Americans aged 50 to 64. 50 to 64 age group did not like the ACA, did not like the campaign's emphasis on the ACA, did not like the Senate candidate's emphasis on the ACA. The ACA's protections for patients with pre-existing conditions was a key topic in recent weeks in the lead up to new Trump Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation, with the court set to hear a challenge to the law soon. Now, let's say the Trump Supreme Court threw the ACA out, and then the Democrats, let's say they had won big, both houses, and they came into office with control of both houses and the presidency, which is a result that at this moment seems a little unlikely. They could have passed the Medicare for All bill immediately and nullified almost instantly what the Supreme Court did, even if they threw it out. But of course, now the Senate is in doubt. So they might as well have campaigned on repealing the ACA and replacing it with something much, much better. In a speech that Trump gave from Wilmington, Delaware, on October 28th, focused on COVID-19 and his healthcare plan, he spoke about the importance of trusting science and mask wearing. And he highlighted Trump's attacks on the ACA, but he only mentioned a public option once. A few days before the election, he only mentioned the public option once. And of course, God forbid he should mention Medicare for All. God forbid. 4, a lot of grassroots money was set on fire. Democrats raised roughly $250 million for Senate races in Kentucky, South Carolina, Texas, and Alabama. And their candidates all appeared to have gone down to defeat by 10 points or more. And by the way, They also raised $69 billion for Sarah Gideon, their candidate in Maine. So they raised $320 billion if you add the state of Maine in. And the candidates in Kentucky, South Carolina, Texas, and Alabama have gone down to defeat by 10 points or more, but Sarah Gideon went down to defeat by 8 points, a pretty big margin against Susan Collins. Susan Collins, whose vote was key to Brett Kavanaugh's rise to the Supreme Court, who betrayed her reputation as a moderate and as an independent, as a Maine independent. And Sarah Gideon couldn't get close to her with nearly $70 billion for the campaign in the state of Maine. These are tough states for Democrats. Well, Maine is not that tough for Democrats. Biden had no trouble running for president and winning Maine. He had no trouble. These are tough states for Democrats, but there's a cautionary tale about resource allocation among Democrats' donor base. While grassroots-funded advocacy and media organizations are starved for resources, a handful of candidates can snap their fingers and be awash in cash at election time and still get crushed. Yes, those hand-picked candidates, handpicked by Chuck Schumer, burned $350 million. $350 million. What if they've given $10 million of that to Paula Jean Swearengin in Maine? Or given $10 million of that to Marquita Bradshaw in Tennessee? What would have happened then, I wonder? Schumer's really got a lot of splaining to do. Democratic Senate candidates saw a massive surge in donations after Justice RBG's death in September, before the party barely put up a fight and Justice Amy Coney Barrett was quickly confirmed to the Supreme Court. But the Democrats' court calculation was wrong. The conventional wisdom was that Democrats shouldn't seriously combat the nomination because a court fight would primarily motivate conservative voters. Exit polls proved that false. 60% of voters said the court was a significant factor in their vote, and a majority of those voters supported Biden, who barely spoke up against the nomination. Had there been a more intense fight, it might have helped the Democrats. I think it certainly would have helped the Democrats. All but one of the top-tier Democratic Senate candidates shied away from talk of adding new Supreme Court seats if their party won control of the Senate, which doesn't matter now since many of them lost anyway. But it still may matter. Still may matter. The Supreme Court issue is a relevant issue for those two Senate candidates running in Georgia. They may have shied away from talking about the Supreme Court before, but now Trump has been defeated. They don't have anti-Trump to run on. Now they got to run on what they're going to do. One of the things they might say they would do is to right the balance in the Supreme Court and all the Federal Court of Appeals, which are all the way over to the right because of Trump's appointments of more than 212 justices to the courts. Maybe we better hear about that in their two runoff campaigns for January 5th that could still determine control of the Senate. Right now, it looks like it's going to be 50 to 48. with the Democrats on the short end. Those 2 seats could get the Democrats to 50 seats. Those 2 Democrats in Georgia need to run on that. And they need to run on Medicare for all also. Right then and there, and the Green New Deal. And if they start running on that from now until January 5th, they can beat those 2 Republican slugs. They're running against 2 Republican retards. They're running against 2 Republican people with the ethics of rats. They don't even have the ethics of rats. 2 morally deficient candidates. That was David Sirota's review with a little embellishment from me of what went wrong on Saturday night. Let's move from there Oh, did I say Saturday night? What went wrong election night? Sorry. No, more recently, David had this take. It's called Celebrate Today, Fight Tomorrow. Though the results are not yet final, it appears Donald Trump will be defeated. Assuming this outcome holds, it is undeniably good news. Even amid all the bad news, and there is a lot of it, we should all take some time to feel genuine gratitude. Even the most hardened cynic should be able to experience at least some twinge of relief that he, Donald Trump, of course, will probably be gone. That said, even the most loyal MSNBC watching liberal should probably understand that because of the down ballot results, this election is only guaranteed to give us one very important thing. But everything else will have to be fought for, and almost certainly a lot of people will continue to suffer and perish. During this pandemic, we are not guaranteed to get much more relief. Joe Biden has recently changed his tune. He's recently changed his tune about deficit spending under pressure from progressives. But he has also spent decades touting himself as the guy who wants to work with Republican lawmakers to cut Social Security in the name of debt reduction. During this healthcare cataclysm, we're not guaranteed to get anything at all. Biden campaigned against Medicare for all and has lately touted a much more limited version of even a modest public health insurance option, just like Obama, immediately starting to back off the public option, which will face tough odds in a Senate whose majority party is run by Mitch McConnell and in a Congress that is partly owned by insurance companies. During this climate emergency, we are not guaranteed to get the sweeping energy, Bonnie's distracting me, and environmental policy changes that scientists tell us are necessary to protect the ecosystem that sustains human life, our lives. Biden must be pressured to use executive authority as congressional Republicans continue to prioritize the profits of their fossil fuel donors over their own constituents and whose communities are being incinerated. During this cataclysm of misinformation, we're not guaranteed to see major changes from a corporate and billionaire-owned mass media that has consistently ignored working people, touted oligarchy, and funneled cash into a vapid horse race punditry while starving journalism of resources. You only change the information ecosystem through the slow and difficult work of building and supporting new forms of grassroots funded media and by breaking up the tech monopolies. During this crisis of confidence in government, in our political system, we are not guaranteed to see systemic changes in the political leadership that has delivered us to this moment of peril. Yes, Trump will be gone, but unless there are loud demands made, unless presidential power is actually used, the ethos of, quote, nothing will fundamentally change, unquote, will likely become a governing strategy. Without pressure for real change, that strategy would be implemented by the same congressional leaders and political operatives who will inevitably be reinstalled into positions of authority even after they and their ideology created the conditions for Trump in the first place. The only thing Trump's defeat guarantees is a respite from the presidency being used to incite, inflame, and psychologically destabilize us on a daily basis. And as I've written before, that is no small thing. While some Republicans will try to save face and pretend Trump's agenda is some anomaly, that's false. On policy, Trump has merely championed a brazen version of his party's long-standing agenda, but Trump is an anomaly in how he has used the bully pulpit to try to sow anxiety, fear, and hate on a daily basis. Sure, lots of other presidents have been horrible, but no president has used the megaphone of the White House in the way he has. And the damage, that another term of that would have done is terrifying to even think about. 4 years of the demagoguery that he's foisted on us has already coarsened our culture and empowered the darkest forces of fascism, greed, and white supremacy. 4 more years would have irreparably changed the nation's psyche. I think we can all agree on that. Biden will not use the presidency in that way. He may promote corporate Democrat talking points. He may give in to Mitch McConnell and his donors, stock his administration with Republicans and Wall Street cronies. And he may continue telling billionaires that he will protect their interests. And if everyone goes back to brunch and he is not pressured, he may not deliver many decent policies. But one thing is all but guaranteed. He will not use the bully pulpit as a weapon of nihilistic incitement. And that at least is a good thing and a very significant change from Trump. Of course, a lot of folks are still understandably angry that the Democratic Party took a rare moment of transformational possibility, an FDR-style opportunity in the face of one of the most winnable presidential races in recent memory, and used that moment to nominate an incrementalist who responded to a national emergency by literally promising his donors that nothing would fundamentally change. Wasn't that egregious? Wasn't that a terrible thing for Biden to say? Didn't he know that was going to get out? We may look back on that particular nominating decision as one of the most epic and tragic missed opportunities of the last century. Exceeded, perhaps, only by the missed opportunity of 2016, where there was a wonderful opportunity to absolutely slaughter Donald Trump when he was running for the president the first time. And then they nominated Hillary Clinton, the absolutely worst candidate to go against him, especially because Biden did not really earn his election victory, to go on with what David says. His retrograde record was wildly out of step with the times. And he won the Democratic primary because almost every past vice president has won their party's nomination. But COVID-19, an economic crisis, and tireless grassroots organizing by heroic progressive activists and groups ended up narrowly defeating his opponent. Never should have been that close, and Biden did the bare minimum without actually shitting the bed. The fact that it was even a narrow race, I'm quoting now, I didn't say that, I'm quoting. The fact that it was even a narrow race, and the fact that Trump appeared to have increased his support among Latinos in some places, is a disturbing sign for the future, particularly with Democratic leaders already doubling down on the, quote, nothing would fundamentally change, unquote, a message, even after the party's disappointing down-ballot losses. Idiots, right? Then again, we don't know where we are in our historical story. A Biden presidency may well be the final Weimar America period, the last interregnum of artificial calm, stasis, and establishment let them eat cakeism before everything collapses into mayhem at the hands of a much smarter, shrewder, and even more reckless version of Trump, like Ted Cruz comes to mind. However, one thing we've learned in the last few years, or maybe Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley. However, one thing we've learned in the last few years is that things are unpredictable and can change quickly, and that means they could change for the better if we're willing to put in the work. The crushing reality of life in this oligarchy seems to be changing minds a lot faster than politicians might let on. The fake, manufactured, self-serving, quote, center, unquote, of the Beltway discourse may have held for now and may be lifting the spirits of Wall Street moguls. But usually reality wins out at the end of the day. The big question is whether we can still muster the will to reduce the amount of pain, suffering, and death between now and then, says David. Okay. And I have to remember that the speech tonight by Biden, as uplifting as it may have been, considering the long 4-year night, of Donald Trump, the rhetoric was fake, manufactured, self-serving center of the Beltway discourse. That's what it was. It was rhetoric taken from Obama, 2004. It was a return to, I'm a Democrat, but I will be the president of all the people. There are no red states. There are no blue states. There's only the United States. We all want a unified country. But the only way this country is going to be unified is through justice. That's not what David's saying. I'm telling you this. It will only be unified through justice. Economic justice, real criminal justice, social justice, equal justice for all under the law, climate justice. What we're lacking today and what we've been lacking for so long is justice in all the various areas and equality. Equality. There were two founding motivational principles of the United States. One was liberty, which we betrayed immediately by continuing slavery, of course. But then there was a struggle for creating liberty for everyone. The other was equality, especially equality of opportunity, but equality, a measure of equality, a country without aristocrats, without an oligarchy, where people could face each other more or less as equals. We have striven for that from the start. Those are the core of our ideas of justice. We are very far from those ideas at present, and we will not have unity until we serve those ideals again. Joe Biden needed to talk about that, and not about an artificial unity that he was going to create somehow through discussion and somehow through compromise. There are some things that cannot be compromised. They must be fought for. We once knew that. And I hope that Biden still knows that, but I severely doubt it. Anyway.
The People's Party.
Bonnie says, and the People's Party. Okay, so I see we've got some new folks here, so welcome. Next was a long piece, also from Jacobin, by Luke Savage. The title of it is "The Trump Era is Over. Our leaders want to take us back to 2015." That is Savage's perception. Unfortunately, he may be right. He goes through how the people felt watching things on election eve. Talks about, some other things. I'm going to skip some of this. When he wrote this, it hadn't been quite yet there that it was clear that Biden, was going to win. But Savage says Trump has never been a popular president. Much of the national media clearly favored a Democratic win. And Wall Street, too. As of late last month, 250,000 Americans had died from the coronavirus, with millions more plunged into poverty. And yet, in the middle of widespread economic hardship and a pandemic, wreaking havoc on lives and livelihoods, but throughout America, historically corrupt, loathed, and scandal-ridden president somehow received millions of additional votes in his bid for re-election. Had the virus never hit and the situation that prevailed in January remained, which saw Trump's economic approval rating rise to levels not seen by any president for 2 decades, not seen since Clinton, there can be little doubt that the former host of TV's Apprentice would have flattened the hapless Biden on his road to a second term. Probably he would have. And Biden was lucky COVID intervened. By the way, without COVID intervening and people suddenly facing the uncertainty of COVID, Biden might never have won the nomination of the Democratic Party. Because at the time, Bernie's campaign was in a state of uncertainty about what to do about COVID, and he had slacked off in his efforts somewhat, afraid of sending people out to canvass and do things on the ground, if you recall. And Bernie's strength, of course, was canvassing and was the ground game and was the rallies. And Bernie had to tail off on those. And people were uncertain. And when they're uncertain, they tend to run to the familiar. And the familiar was Biden. Anyway, going on with, in the weeks ahead, we can expect a deluge of self-serving spin, riddled with the same tone of defensive reassurance that prevailed on election night. But even as it ultimately delivered the necessary tally in the Electoral College, plenty of questions remained about the effectiveness of Biden's candidacy and the Democratic strategy overall. And then he goes into the Lincoln Project, which we have already heard about. And of course, we know that had failed. And Savage says, its particular visibility this cycle notwithstanding, the strategy of the year of the Biden Republican was hardly a blip. The centrist Democrats have long convinced themselves the country is so inherently conservative that coddling right-leaning voters with appeals to moderation is a stroke of Machiavellian genius rather than a capitulation to the inertia of the post-Reagan era. As in 2016, that assumption seems to have borne little fruit. Across the country, in fact, the ballot initiatives and exit polls suggest the Democrats ran to the right of a voting majority on key issues. Florida, the first state to make clear the promised landslide would not be happening, voted by a considerable margin to raise its minimum wage. To what? $15 an hour. Florida voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Florida went for Trump. And at the same time it was going for Trump, it voted by a considerable margin to raise the minimum wage. Okay, now Biden, of course, was for raising the minimum wage, technically speaking, but he didn't campaign on that. There were ballot measures to legalize marijuana, an idea Biden opposes, despite its remarkable popularity across partisan lines. Okay, initiatives to legalize marijuana passed in 5 states. Even with a visibly slanted framing, universal health care scored a resounding 72% support in an exit poll commissioned by, of all places, Fox News, which also identified majority backing for stricter gun control and progressive immigration reform and reproductive rights. And here's Biden running backwards on all those issues. I added that. That's not in the article. Though a fair amount of revisionism will probably appear in the coming weeks, partisans for the Democrats' chosen strategy were confidently predicting it would deliver a 1972-style blowout only days ago. I thought it had the potential to do that too. But of course, I wasn't happy with how Biden was running the frickin' campaign. You know that. Quote, "This may be the biggest landslide possible in this polarized country," unquote. Democratic pollster Stan Greenberg said to the Daily Beast on October 29th. Quote, "This thing is not going to be close," declared James Carville on MSNBC, the eternal optimist. Still more effusive about Democratic prospects. One October 21st New York Times report anticipated, quote, "an ambitious and rare electoral blowout." And I have to admit, I was optimistic too. I thought there was a possibility for Democrats to sweep the Senate and even get as many as between 60 and 62 seats. And I said so here. Because many of these Republican senatorial candidates were on the cusp of defeat. All that was necessary to give them the coup de grace, this is what I'm saying, was Medicare for all and the Green New Deal and free college. Boom! They would have all gone by the wayside. Instead, we got a bunch of people talking about tattoos, or talking about fiscal responsibility, or not talking about anything except getting rid of Trump. They didn't have enough guts even to talk about restructuring the Supreme Court, that they would support restructuring the courts if they got into the Senate. They didn't even say that. They were too chicken. That was me again. Once again, it failed to yield the promised results, said Luke Savage, bleeding terrifying numbers of non-white voters to the Republican Party in the process. Yes, a lot of the Hispanics went over to Trump. Some blacks also went over to Trump. Some of the other minorities gave disproportionately, for them, high approvals to Trump in this election. This brings us to Biden himself, the figure Democratic primary voters were quite sternly told was the safe and electable choice against Donald Trump. Numerous voices on the left argued vociferously that a popular majoritarian program, as measured by the polling data, by the way, a majoritarian program offering to people what they said they wanted in the polls, targeting traditional non-voters and seeking to energize the traditional Democratic base, represented the better option. Yeah, Chuck Rosha got on Rising this past week, and he told people, he said, look, a lot of Hispanic support was lost because the Democrats didn't get on Hispanic media, spend money on Hispanic media early, and talk to the Hispanic workers, offer them the things they wanted. That was not done by the Biden campaign. They just ignored them, both for defeating Trump and turning the tide on decades of liberal retrenchment. Since this theory was never actually tested, we can't know for certain whether its core assumptions were correct, though my opinion on the matter should not be difficult to extrapolate, said Luke Savage. Anyway, he talks about the playbook of the Democratic Party coming up short more times than it's succeeded. Put in the plainest terms, there have been only two Democratic candidates, presidents in the past but 40 years, Obama and Clinton, of course, and the more successful of the two ran as a populist outsider, declaring himself as the leader of a mass movement while pledging to take on Wall Street, dial back America's involvement in foreign wars, and pursue a transformative course for the country. Biden, despite his close association with Obama, played an active role in entrenching triangulation as the modus operandi of the Democratic Party during the 1980s, and never wanted to run a campaign of that kind. Contra the spirit of 2008, the former vice president and soon-to-be president-elect, well, now the president-elect, I guess, since the media have declared him as the president-elect, pitched himself in the more modest of terms as a figure who would temper the chaos and anarchy of the last 4 years and restore to the country to a pre-2016 equilibrium. Seems never to have realized that if that equilibrium was the utopia he thought it was, Trump would have never been elected in 2016. That's me. More moved than mine, his appeal rested and still rests on the flawed assumption that Trumpism begins and ends with Donald Trump's occupancy of the White House. The more conventionally styled and less mercurial president being enough to cure whatever random spasm may have temporarily caused a chunk of the electorate to take leave of its senses. That is a very, very bad theory. A very, very bad theory, because 70 million people, I mean, you have to take the position that 70 million people have taken leave of their senses. I don't think so. This small c conservative approach to national leadership inevitably meant eschewing or marginalizing big policy ideas. Even as a deadly virus invaded the body politic, not just the body politic, the body economic, the body biologic. Our bodies is what the deadly virus has invaded. Not just the body politic. The public option, Biden's supposedly pragmatic alternative to Medicare for all, scarcely received a mention on the campaign trail. The wildfires burned with apocalyptic ferocity across the West Coast, and he offered little but recitation of the empty liberal mantra that climate change is real, while actively distancing himself from the most ambitious green program in modern history. What's that? The Green New Deal, obviously. Even as Republicans made a deadly power grab in the Supreme Court, Biden took care during his first debate with Trump to offer kind words about the president's hard right nominee and rejected calls for judicial reform. Brilliant, right? Brilliant campaign. He ran a brilliant campaign. That's what the mainstream media are going to tell you. They're going to tell you he ran a brilliant campaign. He stayed at home. He said very little, only upbeat kinds of things, and he created a great contrast to Trump. There were other ways to create a great contrast to Trump. Biden did not take those other ways. He did not. Going back to the article. This is to say nothing of Biden's personal weaknesses as a candidate, but generally eluded by mostly sympathetic commentariat, content to bury or spin its wheels on stories or incidents that might put his prospects in jeopardy. Thus, even Biden's penchant for keeping a low profile and running an absentee campaign throughout parts of September seemed to elicit none of the obvious questions and even earned occasional praise. That the former vice president has likely sounded like nothing like the man who so ably debated Paul Ryan in 2012 has largely been pushed from the official narrative altogether. So Luke goes on to talk about key party figures and media surrogates already working to place the blame elsewhere. Former Senator Claire McCaskill talks about her. He talks about how Democrats talk too much about guns and reproductive rights and gay marriage and rights for transsexuals. With Senate runoffs looming in Georgia, meanwhile, Jim Clyburn declared on a caucus call, if we're going to run on Medicare for all, defund the police and socialized medicine, we're not going to win, unquote. We'll have a lot more to say about that. But these are puzzling reactions from figures whose own preferred strategy has so resoundingly failed to deliver its promised result. It's because figures like Jim Clyburn and Nancy Pelosi have been immune to the facts for a very long time. That's me. And I'm going back to the article. As the electoral dust settles, we will inevitably be traded to a growing chorus of voices from across the liberal establishment who will insist the only path forward for Democrats is some noxious mix of economic and cultural revanchism. The liberal center, ever convinced of its own savvy rectitude, paradoxically discovers validation even in moral and tactical defeat. It is so hard to persuade them. This is, again, me editorializing. It's so hard to persuade them of their moral and tactical defeat. It's so hard to get them to accept their moral and tactical defeat. Why is that the case? Because on the way, they've managed to line their pockets so successfully. How can people who have been so successful at getting rich be wrong? How can people with a refrigerator like Nancy Pelosi filled with her designer ice cream possibly be wrong? You know, it almost seemed like Nancy Pelosi was running on her designer ice cream, said Bonnie this afternoon. I think she was running on her designer ice cream. How can anybody think that was a good thing to say on a television interview? Oh, God. Talk about playing into the limousine liberal type of narrative the Republicans have been running on since the 1970s. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is the paradigm of the limousine liberal. Except now it's not a limousine liberal. She's a super Haagen-Dazs liberal. It's not even Haagen-Dazs. It's designer ice cream. Levels above Haagen-Dazs filling her refrigerator. Assuming Republicans retain the Senate, The United States will be led by a de facto McConnell-Biden coalition government throughout a period of spiraling deficits and growing calls for austerity, probably. And the deficits will be spent on the wrong things. They'll be spent to bail out the companies that don't need any bailing out. They'll be spent on things that further exacerbate the inequality we'll see before us, that strengthen the oligarchy and undermine our democracy. Not undermine our political democracy directly, but undermine the social and economic foundations of that particular democracy and create even more money for the rich to funnel into campaigns to politically undermine our democracy. Anyway, the Obama era may therefore be getting their wish. Those who want to return to that era may be getting their wish, albeit as if granted by black magic via the cursed monkey's paw. A centrist president, a divided Congress, and an obstructionist Senate. A return to normalcy at last. And then he talks about incrementalism, triangulation. He talks about what the establishment Democrats did to Bernie Sanders. And then he says, nevertheless, there remains genuine signs of hope. Buoyed by important congressional victories in New York, in Michigan, in Minnesota, and Missouri, the insurgent left now counts more elected officials in its ranks than at any other moment in modern history. This summer's historic protests against police violence and the widespread support they received give the lie to the idea of an irredeemably conservative country, as do a slew of ballot initiatives and exit polls suggesting a continued hunger for an alternative to the paltry bipartisan fare currently on offer. The Trump presidency will soon be over. For better and for worse, politics are here to stay. So that was Luke Savage's take on the election and what is likely for the aftermath. But later on, if we have time, I will go through a piece by Lisa Featherstone whose title is there was actually a lot of good news for the left on election day, and she sort of catalogs nice things that happened for the left. But before I do that, I want to focus on what happened right after the election in the House. Two progressives. Quickly. First, there was a piece by Jake Johnson from Common Dreams. And the title is, quote, "They had one job and they blew it," unquote. But the progressives fire back as centrist Democrats in the House blame the left for election failures. So I'm going to share that, and I'm going to go through it. It isn't too long. I'm going to go through 4 in pretty quick succession between now and 11 p.m. Then I'll consider your comments. Anyway, there was a big caucus call in the House, and Representative Abigail Spanberger, Democrat from Virginia. She's from the Virginia 7th, which is in rural country in the middle of the state. A former CIA operations officer who's clinging to a 1.2 percentage point advantage, I think it's now a 1 percentage point advantage, over her Republican challenger, led the centrist charge during the heated 2-hour call Thursday, attributing losses by moderate members to GOP attack ads, tarring them as socialists, quote unquote, and accusing them of wanting to, quote, defund the police. The ads, according to Spanberger, were made possible by the rhetoric of progressive lawmakers. Spanberger says, quote, we need to not ever use the word socialist, quote unquote, or socialism, quote unquote, ever again, she said, arguing that Democrats should watch Republican ads and adjust their messaging accordingly. Advice that ignores the GOP long record of labeling Democrats, including Democratic candidate Joe Biden and other centrists like Barack Obama, as socialists, regardless of how stridently they disavow the label. And the House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, he really needs to be retired quick. I delivered a message similar to Spanberger's, warning on the private call that if, quote, we're going to run on Medicare for all, defund the police, socialize medicine, we're not going to win, unquote. I got something to say to Jim Clyburn. Dummy, it's not socialized medicine. It's socialized insurance. There's a distinction, in case you're too dumb to see it. Despite Election Day exit polling showing that 72% of voters favored transitioning to a, quote, government-run healthcare plan, unquote. Another name for Medicare for all. Progressives during the caucus call and suddenly on social media forcefully pushed back. Luke Savage said, Dems ran on none of these things. In fact, their entire strategy quite actively repudiated them. There is apparently nothing that will make elite liberals think twice about their own failures, even when their preferred methods have been tested and come up short. Anyway, Rashida Tlaib said, a self-described, well, she is, of course, a self-described Democratic socialist who, along with other members of, quote, the squad, unquote, easily won re-election Tuesday, reportedly accused her centrist colleagues of only being interested in appealing to white people in suburbia, neglecting policies that would drive turnout among and disproportionately benefit people of color. And Representative Jayapal, the Democrat of Washington, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, also spoke out against the centrist finger-pointing, warning House Democrats could see even bigger losses in 2022 and 2024 if they don't engage voters motivated by ambitious progressive policy platforms. By the way, if you think back to 2018, how did Democrats get that big win in the House? Not only on anti-Trumpism, not only on promising resistance, as in impeachment, meaningful impeachment for meaningful things, not the stupid show constructed by Nancy Pelosi. They partly got elected on that. But what they led with, what the leading theme was in 2018, the leading theme was new healthcare reforms, as in strengthening the Affordable Care Act, or, depending on the person running, as in Medicare for all. True, the majority of them did not run on Medicare for all, but they ran on a government-run program that would be introduced that would greatly improve their options with respect to health care. Because a lot of those candidates were running on public option. They were featuring that the Republicans were trying to repeal the ACA, and then what was needed was a much strengthened public health care plan. That's how they ran in 2018. But that's not how they ran in 2020. Why not? Why weren't they running that way in 2020? There were two reasons. In the run-up to the 2020 elections, we didn't hear much about that from them. We heard a lot about anti-Trump, and we heard a lot about the anti-Trump campaign. But since they were being led by Joe Biden and being led by Nancy Pelosi, we didn't hear much about how they were going to give us a great new health care plan in 2020, because Biden had already said no Medicare for all. So most of the Democratic candidates who were members of what is called the presidential party in the House, there's this classic view that there's a group of Democrats in the House who always follow the leader. They do not vote on any agenda. They follow the leader. When their president is not in power, they follow the House Speaker, or they follow the majority leader in the Senate, but they follow the leader. When their president is in office, they follow their president. That's why they're known as the presidential party. It's true for the Republicans, too. They have a presidential party, and they have also an ideological party in the House. Okay, a party with an agenda in the House. They're not really the same party. In each House, there's a split between these two ends. You have in the Democratic Senate, in the Democratic House, you have the progressives running on Medicare for all, on the Green New Deal, on free college, on doing something about the housing crisis. And you have the follow the leader Democrats. In 2020, their leader was Nancy Pelosi, and increasingly, as the spring and summer wore on, Joe Biden. And so, they didn't run aggressively on health care in distinguishing themselves from the Republicans. They did not run aggressively on free college. They did not run aggressively on the Green New Deal. They restricted the campaign to anti-Trump, pretty much to anti-Trump. They didn't promise great things when it came to restoring the economy. They didn't promise great stimulus because they were following the leader. They weren't promising they were going to take care of their constituents. They didn't run on positive things. They ran on negative things. That's why they lost. Anyway, the Sunrise Movement kind of reinforced this, of course. By the way, here's a very sterling graphic. One more note, in May and June, when Dem voter registration bottomed out due to the pandemic and GOPs were out registering the Dems, it was the George Floyd BLM demonstrations that created a huge Democratic voter registration spike. There you see it in blue. See how the Republicans were leading all year in new registrations? And then the Republicans still go up in new registration. The independents spike, and the Democrats spike most of all, and stay ahead of the Republicans for the remainder of the campaign. That was done by Black Lives Matter. That was done by the George Floyd protests and by the reactions thereafter. That's what led to Democratic gains. But Democrats, these people running for the Congress, not many of them ran on that. Not many of them ran on those things. They ran centrist. Look at the toss-up seats on the Cook Political Report. One anonymous Democratic lawmaker told HuffPost, "I'm not sure we won a single fucking one." That's a quote. I didn't say that. Dems expected to pick up multiple seats in Texas. Instead, it looks like they may lose a seat there or two. Great candidates were beaten there. Why? Because the top of the ticket wasn't running on Medicare for All, wasn't running on the Green New Deal. It wasn't the major theme of the Democrats' push in Texas. They were pushing strong to win Texas, running anti-Trump. But why vote for them? Why vote for them then? Why vote for them? Alexandra Rojas, executive director of the Justice Democrats, said House Democrats have only themselves to blame for the election results. Because, of course, Justice Democrats were also singled out by these centrists on that call. In response to the blame being hurled at progressives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez argued in a series of tweets Friday that moderate House Democrats who lost or who are at risk of losing their seats need to take a closer look at the shortcomings of their own campaign. She said she decided to open the hood on struggling campaigns of candidates who are blaming the progressives for their problems. And she said, quote, almost all had awful execution on the digital aspects of their campaign. During a pandemic, underinvestment across the board, unquote. In other words, when they couldn't get out and they didn't have the ground game to rely on because of the pandemic, they didn't bother to invest in their digital end. They were digitally incompetent. Of course, her campaign is real strong when it comes to digital. She says, quote, ideology plus messaging are the spicy convos a lot of people jump to. But sometimes it's about execution and technical capacity, unquote. And she said also, finger pointing is not going to help. There's real workable and productive paths here if the party is open to us. After all, I got here by beating a Dem who outspent me 10-1, who I knew had bad polling. And she just rubbed that in with that particular statement. But she was quite well justified. Let's move further. Let's move further to another piece on that particular controversy. There are 3 other pieces on that controversy to go through. And they're important. And they're also entertaining. So, in this piece by Julia Conley from Common Dreams, which was on Friday, November 6th, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not directly address comments made in Thursday evening's House's Democratic call. But, of course, I've already referred to the Twitter thread that she did, where she said that she decided to open the hood on struggling campaigns of candidates who are blaming progressives for their problems. And she points out almost all had awful execution on digital during a pandemic. She capitalized that. The whole progressivism is bad argument just doesn't have any compelling evidence that I've seen. And, of course, she answered Pelosi, and Clyburn. And she said there are swing seat incumbents who co-sponsored the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, etc. And if I'm not mistaken, every single one won re-election. Every single one of the swing seats incumbents who co-sponsored the Green New Deal, and Medicare for All. And she pointed to some safe seat incumbents like herself, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib, who retained their House seats, as well as helping secure Biden's victories in their key states. She pointed to Cori Bush, who was elected as a representative in Missouri, and Representative-elect Jamal Bowman, a Democrat of New York, both of whom unseated powerful, long-time corporate-backed congressmen. Democrats who lost included Donna Shalala, Democrat of Florida, the old Clintonite who used to be the head of HHS, lost. Colin Peterson, Democrat of Minnesota, lost. Abby Finkenauer, who's Democrat of Iowa, all of whom oppose Medicare for All and reducing police funding. She points to their victories, while Spanberger complained on the Democrats' call that other candidates' embrace of such policies nearly cost her seat in Congress, which she retained after winning by a single point. The candidates who ran on those policies won by far greater margins. Investing time in, quote, deep canvassing, unquote, in order to connect with voters about the issues that matter to them are among the ways candidates like Spanberger and others can secure more decisive victories, Ocasio-Cortez said. When it comes to defund and socialism attacks, people need to realize these are racial resentment attacks, the congressman said. You're not going to make that go away. You can make it less effective. How? You invest in year-round deep canvassing. Data shows this kind of work helps to blunt the force of racial resentment at the polls. If you're always running away from convos about race, then the only people owning it are the GOP. You'll lose. Deep canvassing, in which candidates and campaigners have in-depth conversations with voters in order to learn about issues that matter to them, have been shown to be 100 times more effective at garnering votes than typical short interactions during door-knocking operations. Pandering to voters whose top concerns are law and order, unquote, or avoiding a, quote, socialist, unquote, takeover of the government through the expansion of Medicare to all Americans, Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, will only serve to alienate communities of color who responded positively campaigning by progressives this year. And she pointed out, you can't just tell black, brown, and youth organizers writing in to save us every election to be quiet or not have their reps champion them when they need us or wonder why they don't show up for midterms when they're scolded for existing, especially when they're delivering victories. Other progressives on social media echoed Ocasio-Cortez's objections to centrist hand-wringing and finger-pointing. And Jeet Heer, of The Nation, said, I can't emphasize this enough, especially given the current round of anti-progressive rhetoric coming from centrist Dems. Pennsylvania flipped because activist groups did the hard work of organizing that the National Party has been avoiding. By the way, that's what happened in Arizona, too. 4 years of work from Hispanic groups. In Arizona, 4 years of hard work flipped that state. It wasn't that Cindy McCain endorsed Joe Biden. That is not what really delivered the victory there. It was hard and unremitting work for the Democrats over 4 years' time. Jonathan Smucker said, if you appreciate Pennsylvania delivering Trump a historic defeat, please support the people-powered grassroots organizations that made a plan to win and have been working their asses off for 4 years to bring it home. Organization with links in this thread. And the Sunrise Movement tweeted that today our generation will save democracy, ensure all votes are counted, and end Trump's fascist reign. In the next few weeks, every unpopular Dem who lost will try to blame these young voters. They'll blame our protests. They'll blame our demands. They should be thanking us. Absolutely. we all should be thanking them. On to the next one. I'm going through this conflict now for you. There was a poll by Fox News, commissioned by Fox News. And what that poll showed, it came out about the same time as the preemptive assault on universal health care by Jim Clyburn, a top recipient of money from the pharmaceutical industry. What would happen if he didn't have that money, right? Comes just days after a series of Fox News polls showed that 72% of voters favored changing to a government-run healthcare plan, among other egalitarian policies that received widespread support. Despite what corporate front groups and lazy pundits always say, tweeted journalist Andrew Paris, people absolutely do not like their private health insurance. They do not like it. They want a government-run healthcare plan. Changing to a government-run healthcare plan, 39%. Somewhat favor, 33%. 72%. Somewhat opposed, 14%. Strongly opposed, 15%. Only 29% oppose. 72% are for it. So I'll go through the rest of this quickly. I just wanted to highlight the results of that poll. It just so happens that both candidates in Georgia, by Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, support a public health insurance option that is universally accessible. Not what Biden's advocating for. One that is universally accessible to everyone. They may not be for Medicare for all yet, but they're for that. They're going to run on that. They need to push it in the faces of Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. But if the House Democrats' contentious conference call is any indication, the moderates' hostility to universal health care could push the candidates to move closer to Joe Biden's position, which is a public option that would only be open to lower-income Americans rather than be open to everyone. Yes, if it's going to be a public option, it has to be open to everyone. And it has to be cheap. It has to be cheaper than private insurance. There should be no consideration to saving the private insurance companies. If there's going to be a public option, or they're going to support a public option, it's got to be a public option that's going to win. That's cheap enough to win. And it covers everything. So, I think that's enough for that one. And we can quickly move to the final piece I wanted to cover. I'm a little bit late, but in some ways, the final piece, is the best one. It's the best one. It is the best one. It's Ocasio-Cortez's detailed answer. Every single one, this was written by John Kelly at Common Dreams. Every period, single period, one period, colon. Ocasio-Cortez notes every Democrat who backed Medicare for All won re-election in 2020. And she's got a list here. But what we really need to see, the best thing to see, is the full list. So let's see if we can bring up the full list. Okay, so you see the centrists were pushing a narrative that the candidates, okay, who are progressive, calling for policies like single payer or the Green New Deal, are a hindrance to electoral success. But Ocasio-Cortez wasn't having any, and she's got a great staff to put together really nice things for her. Hannah Trudeau tweeted, just a stunning statement from, again, Biden surrogate John Kasich, quote, the Democrats have to make it clear to the far left that they almost cost him the election, unquote. Alexandria said in reply, anyone saying this after immigrant organizers delivered Arizona, black grassroots flipped Georgia, Michigan going blue with reality bending 94% Detroit margin, plus Rashida Tlaib running up the margins in her district, and Trump publicly challenging Ilhan MN in Minnesota and losing, isn't a serious person. Okay. And then she goes on to, let me see this. Here's the full chart. This was tweeted. It was tweeted by Ryan Knight, a proud socialist who right now is one of the central persons in the movement for a People's Party. He tweeted, support progressive policies like Medicare for All and win elections. Campaign against progressive policies like Medicare for All and lose elections. And then he gives the whole list, okay, that Ocasio-Cortez gave. Abby Finkenauer, support M4A? No. Did she win the election? No. AOC, yes and yes. Presley, yes and yes. Colin Peterson, no and no. Cori Bush, yes and yes. But Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, no and no. Donna Shalala, no and no. Ilhan Omar, yes and yes. Jamal Bowman, yes and yes. Joe Cunningham, no and no. Katie Porter, yes and yes. Kendra Horn, no and no. Matt Cartwright, yes and yes. Max Rose, no and no. Mike Levin, yes and yes. Mondaire Jones, yes and yes. Peter DeFazio, yes and yes. By Rashida Tlaib, yes and yes. And Cochitl Torres Small, no and no. By the way, when the Democrats fixed it so Cochitl Torres Small could win her New Mexico district in 2018, there was a candidate that was running against her that I interviewed maybe a couple, 3 times in the run-up to 2018. That candidate was for Medicare for All and a Green New Deal. And had the Democratic establishment gotten out of the way in that one and not successfully interposed Cochitl Torres Small because she had a Hispanic name, had they not interposed her to run in that state, which she did in 2018 successfully, that seat would have been taken by that other Green New Deal and Medicare for All candidate now. And she would have been successful this time, while Conchita Torres Small has lost her seat. As astute political observers have been pointing out for years, the U.S. electorate rate remains very supportive of universal programs and other progressive policy ideas that their elected representatives, both Democrats and Republicans, have refused to embrace, with an increasing focus on the need for radical and far-reaching changes to the world's economic and energy systems in order to address the existential crisis of the climate emergency. Voters across the political spectrum have showed in every poll after poll after poll their support for such action to be taken. And as AOC added to a tweet about Medicare for All on Saturday, quote, "We're running numbers on the Green New Deal," unquote, next. So she's combative. She's got the receipts. She's powerful. She delivers the message powerfully. And she's right. And she's got them on the run right now because they are fact-free, prejudice-filled, blind to reality, inured to reality by their biases, their donor biases, their biases toward the people who give them money. That's the problem with the Democratic Party. All that money, $14 billion was spent on this election. And I believe the Democrats spent more than the Republicans. In many of these races, they were better funded. A lot of that was grassroots fundraising. They manipulated. Jamie Harrison in South Carolina manipulated people from the grassroots and raised $108 million. He burned it up. Couldn't win with $108 million. What a cretin. Couldn't win. I'm sorry. He's a cretin. If he'd run on Medicare for All and free college and the Green New Deal and learned a bit of MMT, he would have won. With $108 million, he couldn't have lost. He could have flooded the airways with messages people wanted to hear. Instead, he flooded the airways with identitarian crap. Yes, that is what happened. So, we got a big job ahead of us, folks. That big job that we got ahead of us, that's the job of going at Biden every day for years and years and years. Every day. No, I thought that was $14 billion spent by both parties. I don't know the breakout, okay, by parties. I'm not claiming $14 billion spent by Democrats, but $7 billion spent by Democrats alone, or $8 billion spent by Democrats alone. That was more than both parties spent in 2016. 2016, the figure was $6 billion. Now, we're talking about also at all levels. We're not just talking about at the federal level. We're talking about federal, state, and local now by both parties. $14 billion. It's an unprecedented amount. It's obscene. It's obscene. What is that spent on? A lot of it is spent on these frickin' consultants who can't think their way out of a paper bag. They're so biased. I mean, what are they doing? They're just conveying messages to the candidates that the donors who are paying the bill want to hear. That's what they're doing. Excerpt. Sources are telling the Chronicle that Senator Mitt Romney has been asked by the presumptive president-elect Joe Biden to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. He is currently discussing the nomination with his family and is expected to accept the appointment. Biden advisors expect that Romney, a former management consultant by training and a former CEO of Bain Capital, will be tasked with making the national healthcare system more affordable without the legislation that what? Oh, God. What a bonehead play. What a bonehead play. Like Mitt Romney is going to have any influence over the Republican Party in Congress, the Trumpian Republican Party in Congress. Kay says, I guess I can try to get on Medicaid next week since Biden won, for whatever good, but that does me. Well, I don't think the thinking at Medicaid is going to change until Biden gets in office and the Trump people start getting fired. But that's just me. I might be wrong. Alva says, shit, there goes the election relief moment. And Rahul Majumdar says, makes sense. Romney Care in Massachusetts was the model for Obamacare. Right, but Obamacare hasn't worked. So why should it work? At the federal level, why should it work? So Joanne says, Arizona turned blue, legalization of cannabis, removed McSally, and additional funding for public college. That was great. Now, can Arizona contain the virus without federal funds? Rahul Majumdar says, Jacobin article and Joe hitting it out of the park. Harrison, 75 million. Harrison, 108 million wasted in South Carolina. Not 75 million. 108 million. Kay says, Joe Biden should be good for public education, at least, I hope. Yeah, I think she should. She should be good. Joe should be good for public education, too. Kay says, hopefully Jill will take DeVos's position. Well, sadly, she is much more qualified, than Betsy DeVos for that particular position. There's no doubt about that. However, Joe won't be able to nominate and get his wife confirmed. I mean, that's not going to happen. It has the appearance of nepotism and conflict of interest about it. I don't think it's going to happen. She might become the behind-the-scenes leader of the Department of Education. But she's not going to be the Secretary of Education. That's not going to happen. Avril says, I'm not worried much about education at the moment as Florida COVID numbers surge and will probably have to be locked down again. I'm hoping he'll be good on COVID recovery and funding policies. I think Biden is going to be a lot better on those policies than Trump. I think he will seek funding for handling COVID, that the Democrats will handle that in a competent way. I'm far more worried, however, that they'll not do for the economy what needs to be done. Kay says, or at least have a hand in it. Joanne. Avril says, but Nebraska's still counting. Anyone know? Kay says, I'm worried about all of it. The reason I mention public ed is because I saw the difference in education. But from the time my older kids went to school and when Amber went to school a decade later. Not good now at all. Steve says, I'm going to brunch. Fuck this shit. Avril says, I saw the acronym definition of brunch. Deep stuff. Avril says, will Barr be gone? Yes, Barr will be gone. If Barr is smart, he'll resign right now. Avril said, and get out of town quick and make his plans to leave the country if he possibly can. Avril says, where's the woo emoji? And Rahul Majumdar says, less than 2% to count. Trump 4 votes. Biden wins. Congressional district 2nd. Yes. Avril says, oh shit. That is damn sure Obama rhetoric, Dr. Joe. And Avril says, Rahul Majumdar, merci. And Avril says, I'm glad I didn't watch Biden's speech. Somehow I knew it will be the SOS. And Rahul Majumdar says, Baturien, you're welcome. And Avril says, Rahul Majumdar, and smiles. And Rahul says, a lack of COVID-19 empathy cost Trump the election. Yes, that, plus his managerial incompetence. He needed to get a manager in to handle COVID. He should have said to the guy, stop these deaths, stop these cases, do whatever you have to do. I'll back you 100%. I'm getting out of the way. He should have done this in February when he found out it was serious. He should have brought in a honcho, a real honcho. And he should have said, look all around the world and look at the people who are doing best and do what they do. And I'll cover for you. That's what Trump should have done. Kay says, Avril, the music was the best part of it. Great playlist. Avril said, he really is a heartless bastard. He is. He's a bastard. And he's heartless. And he's malicious. Avril says, a bunch of old people songs. Yep. Trump could have easily won by just not being such an asshole. Yeah. He could have easily won if he just handled COVID. He could have had the thing done in such a short time. And the economy opened. Everything he wanted. Classic rock. Tom Petty, Tina Turner. Kay says, I'm old, so I liked it. Laugh out loud. I really like stuff from the 60s. Avril said, I've had enough of that old stuff. You can have it all to yourself. Kay says, my daughter Amber is 35 and she liked most of those old songs too, though. She was raised on it. Rahul says, being an asshole is part of Trump's charm. However, he went overboard and got burned. Yeah, a certain amount of it, yeah. I mean, a certain amount of it is okay. But in Trump's case, the meanness, the maliciousness, the vulgarity behind it, it wasn't fun. It was just wicked, evil. Joanne says, age to perfection. Ira says, I do love that old Ray Charles, though. You mean old Ray Charles, right? His Hit the Road Jack is my theme song for outing A-Golf. Exactly, Joanne. And Avril says, Ray, not Way. Avril says, will our squad be able to do anything under the Biden administration? Yeah, I think they will be there. They've doubled their size to 8 people now. And I think that they will be able, when you add them to people like Jayapal and Ro Khanna, Katie Porter, and some others who are pretty progressive most of the time. Some of the old progressives, like Raul Grijalva and Mark Pocan, and Peter DeFazio, and Lloyd Doggett. I mean, some of those guys can get pretty good, especially on important issues, especially when it comes to Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. They can be brought into the fold. And Joanne says, I'll certainly be supporting progressives and pushing Biden left. Steve says, not with Pelosi around, sadly. Who says Pelosi's going to be around? She's got to run again. She's got to run again in January. There may be enough for the progressives now to block her, force her to step back, force her to give it to Barbara Lee, someone who's going to listen to the squad. I mean, remember, she's lost. She had a strong hand when she came in 2018, when after the election of 2018, when she came in 2019, she had a strong hand because the Democrats won. But now, with her strategy, the Democrats have lost seats when the conventional wisdom was that they should have swept. A conservative notion was that they would gain 5 seats. There were many pundits expected them to gain 10 seats or 15 seats, come out close to 250 seats. I don't even know if they yet have even the majority. I mean, they'll get it, I think. They're still counting in many close races. Kay says Bernie will keep on pushing, and so will the squad. Avril says, yeah, I'm in fascist book jail for being pissed at Cubans and Colombians for giving Trump Florida. They called it hate speech. Oh, well, that's fascist book for you. Avril says, I hope they get rid of her. Joanne says, I was in FB jail Tuesday and Wednesday for dissing fake Christians. Avril says, but Joanne, solidarity, comrade, I got 30 days. Steve says, I did 90 days in FB jail, still don't know why. And Rahul said, I have 2 warnings but haven't been in FB jail yet. I don't even know if I'm in FB jail. Maybe I am. I don't even know. Avril says, I might join Twitter as a backup if my roommate won't object to me using her phone for that. Avril says, lucky. Steve says, you're not trying hard enough. And Rahul says, don't worry, I know the buttons to push to earn jail time, laugh out loud. Steve said, what the hell is wrong with those people in San Francisco? Well, it's not the whole city, it's just her district. And Rahul says, Pelosi got nearly 80% of the vote in her district anyway. She did. Kay said, they used to bug me, not anymore. I guess I watch too much news and don't comment much on anything anymore. It was a good show today on Jacobin Live today with Anna Kasparian, Kay, and Nando Villa. If I'm not mistaken, Kay, I think that's how he spells his name. But I'm not sure. Don't take my word for it on this one. Avril says, it isn't hard. I didn't even cuss. All I said that Cubans, Kay, and Colombians might as well be maggots, and that got me in the clink. Maggots. What's a maggot anyway? I mean, I think the real maggots are spelled differently, not M-A-G-A-T-S. Avril says, 80% when life is just too good for folks, they step on the least of us. Kay says, hopefully Georgia will send 2 more Dems to the Senate after their runoffs. Not if they don't run better than they did in the regular campaign. Rahul says 2 blue wins makes it a 50-50 Senate. Don't write off Al Gross in Alaska yet. They still have to count the mail-in votes there. He's behind by 2-1. But, look how far behind Biden was in Pennsylvania. Kay says, no, it's 50-50 now. I think, no, it's not 50-50. No, it's not 47-47. The anticipated vote right now is 50-48. It is thought that Al Gross will not win in Alaska, and it's thought that Cal Cunningham will not win in North Carolina, that he's too far behind, to win. But given the outstanding votes, in North Carolina. I mean, he gave away that election. Not only did he not run as hard as he might, pushing for better health care, but in addition, he had a sexting scandal in the middle of the campaign. Did he want to run for the Senate or not? What was that about? How stupid do you have to be? I mean, after what Anthony Weiner went through, I would have thought all of those guys would have sworn off sexting for any reason. Alvarez says Spanberger can go straight to hell. Well, she can certainly cancel her frickin' emails to me. Kay says, I hate Clyburn. He needs to go. Me too. Kleinberg is a thorn in Jesus' crown. Damn hypocrite. Rahul Majumdar says, progressives vote for centrist Democrats anyway, only when they don't have any choice. Rahul Majumdar says, I believe those are faux-gressives. Kay says, they did this time to get rid of Rump. Avril says, good point. Kay, Steve Wolfbrand says, Howie Doody got a whopping 0.2%. That's because Howie Doody is so charismatic. And Rahul Majumdar says, only if the alternative is unacceptable. And Rahul Majumdar says, would Mitt Romney be a hedge for Biden? Would he be a hedge against both Trumpsters and progressives as HHS secretary? I don't know. If he's trying to emphasize the public option and he wants someone who may do a good job at the administration, and the management, probably Romney will do a good job. I'll tell you, he won't be any worse than Donna Shalala would have been. Of course, that's going back 20 years when she was running HHS. Alpha says, how old is Biden again? 107. They're also out of touch. Raul says he'll be 78 on November 20th. And Raul says, Howie is getting MMT finally. Yeah, I know he's getting MMT. But like I said, he has the charisma of a flea. Raul says, crap, quite possible. They're both for corporations and industries, after all. Kay says, I've got high hopes for the movement for a People's Party. Yeah, me too. And Rahul Majumdar close enough, and Rebecca McClaskey says, Democrats will lose the youth if they don't move left and embrace progressive platforms. I will not vote for Democrats again. I am devoted to building the People's Party, and it is growing to pressure Biden since it offers progressives an alternative. I think you're quite right, Rebecca.
Me too.
Bonnie says, me too. Democrats will continue their attacks on the left socialists, unquote, quote unquote, unless the threat that the left has somewhere else to go is realized. This is not primarying an incumbent Democrat. This is running on the beloved platform of the 5 justices. Hell, the 5 justices? Oh, the 5 types of justice. There are more than 5 types of justice. I don't know. I think in my public purpose paper, I think I identify 12 types of justice. Anyway, Avil says, Rahul Majumdar, unfortunately too late though. And Rahul says, California 12th, Pelosi 78.2, Buttar 21.8%, 89% of the votes counted. I think even if all 11% went for Shahed, there are not enough votes for him to catch up, right? Steve says MPP would be good. And Steve Wolfbrand says, untucking believable. I'm not sure I know what untucking believable is. Biden going to reward Bernie for helping him? Well, I don't know, but I suspect what he'll probably give Bernie is a kick in the ass.
He hasn't thanked him yet.
He hasn't even thanked him yet. He hasn't even publicly come out and thanked Bernie for all the work he did for him. Steve says, regarding Pelosi results, unfucking believable. I caught that, Steve. And Rebecca McCloskey says, I have a feeling they will blame Bernie and his supporters for not getting their landslide. Of course, they always blame somebody else. And mostly it's us. I mean, even when they were going after Russiagate, they were still blaming us. And Kay says, he better, but I doubt it. Steve Wolfbrand says, no. Now, Rebecca McCloskey, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Steve Wolfbrand said, would surprise me if Biden puts Hillary in the cabinet. Yeah, Secretary of State again. Except I think he's going to go for Susan Rice. Because I saw Susan Rice today. She was smiling. She was so happy. She's so sure she's going to get a big job in the Biden administration. Susan Benghazi Rice. Now, I think the Republicans really overdid it on the Benghazi thing with her. It wasn't fair. But at the same time, at the same time, there are lots of people who could serve very creditably as Secretary of State who would have a lot more support than Susan Rice has at this point, and who would do just as good or a better job as Secretary of State. Avromano says, or he does or quits, and Kamala does. And or quits and Kamala dies. What's that? Biden's over 75 million votes, Trump approaching 71 million. Yeah. Biden probably will get more votes than that. 75 and 71 is only 146 million. People were forecasting 160 to 162 million were going to vote in this election. They're still projecting that. Okay. But that's only 146 million by my count. So where's the other 14 to 16 million going to come from? Where did it go? Was there maybe voter suppression? Does that maybe account for that gap? That's a big gap. That's 14 million votes, they say, still to come. I don't think there are that many votes still to come. All but 4 states now have finished their counting, right? Where's it going to come from? MSNBC is already blaming progressives. I can't watch that network anymore. I like Ali Velshi and Chris Hayes, and that's about it. Yeah, I think Ali Velshi pretty much says what he wants to say. But in Chris Hayes' case, I think he's a sellout. Does a Span burger come with fries? Sorry, Steve, it's spelled a little differently. She spells her name with an E. Both Ali and Chris are still progressive. I think Chris Hayes is a sellout progressive. That's what I think. I'll tell you how I know that. He used to have his morning show. Okay, and to his morning show, he would invite MMT people. He even invited Stephanie Kelton, a couple of times. Once he got his evening show, his primetime show, at 9 o'clock. Or, I'm sorry, it's at 8 o'clock, right? I don't know. I don't watch those shows anymore, so I've forgotten when he goes on, whether it's 8, or 9. But once he got that, he never invited Stephanie Kelton on again. And I know he liked what he had to say because I could tell how he reacted to it. But he never invited her again. Why? Because she was closely identified with Bernie Sanders. That wasn't acceptable. And he had a young child. and he liked to live in New York, and he was making a pile, okay, at MSNBC, and he literally sold out. He did not do what he wanted to do because he knew it was unacceptable. Unacceptable, okay, at MSNBC. Other people with more courage there just quit. Ed Schultz, for example. Avil said, great comeback by AOC. She's not a coward when it comes to keeping it real. No, I don't think she is. Bernie Sanders' machine in Nevada, okay, in Arizona made a difference. Of course it did. Avil says, Rahul Majumdar committed. They are out in that devastating heat, canvassing and whatnot. Not just the devastating heat, but out there canvassing with COVID. And Dolores says there was talk that she is interested in Department of Defense. And Dolores Pierce says, oh no, she loves death and destruction too much. She'll start that no-fly zone over Syria BS again. The fact that Trump almost won is very disturbing. Trump might be gone, but his supporters will still be here. Completely agree, Steve Wolfbrat. We need to have policies that are that will do something for his supporters. A lot of his supporters were supporting him for economic reasons. They believed, okay, the Democrats would never do anything for them. But that Trump might. And they still believed it. In other words, they believed the economy was so great because of Trump. Then, of course, Trump inherited Obama's economy, which finally got going. After 6-7 years, it finally got going. The economy came back after the recession. It took 6 or 7 years, okay, to fully come back because of the deficit hawkery of the idiot Obama-Biden administration. And Trump benefited. It was like Reagan, who benefited from Carter's policies in deregulating the natural gas industry. Carter did it, and Reagan got all the benefit from it because it didn't change the industry in sufficient time to get a good economy for Carter going. Anyway, Rebecca says, if Trump would have insisted on a single-payer medical system, he would have won. He used to support it. Whichever candidate pushes single payer will win until we get it. The information is flooding the airways and water coolers now. The public is becoming more and more aware. I don't even know now if they're fully aware how much more cheaply healthcare can be delivered in a single payer system. We can cover everybody with better care for 2/3 of what we're spending now. We've been able to do that for a very long time. People just don't know it. The mainstream media hides these facts from people that are well known to people in the particular area. Alvar says he did it. It took the Space Force to bring him down. Dolores says, I hope Biden keeps HRC out of his administration. He doesn't owe her anything. No, he doesn't owe her a thing. And by the way, she would weigh down his administration. She would be more of an anchor than Mitt Romney would be. But really, why would he put Mitt, in his administration? I mean, really, why give Mitt a chance to take another run at the presidency? I don't know. I mean, he's in the Senate, so I suppose his being in the Senate gives him a chance. Okay, so maybe it's a case that actually, if you put him into the administration, it might be his graveyard. I mean, maybe that's what Biden's figuring. I don't know. Anyway, Rahul Majumdar says, may not be the real narrative, but an FU signed John McCain from the grave is poetic justice for Trump. Yeah. Avril says, COVID is making it mandatory. It's do or die now. No, I think the squad is now up to 8. With the gov-backed, or will be up to 8 in January. With a gov-backed healthcare system, we get better outcomes too. The gov is invested in making us healthy, not keeping us sick. But Kasich in a Biden cabinet, oh my God, that would be terrible. Now, Rahul Majumdar, don't give him any ideas. Kate says Kasich made Ohio a toxic waste dump and also backed the most restrictive abortion bill, too. And Rahul says, have big hopes for Cori Bush, the 5th squad member. Rahul says, AOC knows MMT. So does Rashida. She knows MMT, too. And I think Ilhan knows MMT, too. I'm not sure about Ayanna Pressley. But I think she must know something about it because the others probably have talked to her about it. But in legislation that has been suggested thus far, the only one who's put out any legislation that's actually used some of the MMT insights, only one of them is Rashida. It's the ABC Act that she put out there, and that was then co-sponsored. The chief co-sponsor became Jayapal. So I suppose that Jayapal has gotten some degree of MMT education as well. And Rahul Majumdar sounds like he's a bona fide advocate for mental health, which is usually needed for maggots. Steve Wolbrand says, meanwhile, COVID cases skyrocketing. Rahul says, California is 25% left, 4 to 5 million right there. Wow. 25% left, 4 to 5 million right there. Well, that's something. Eric Perkins, our state had a 75% turnout. Very impressive, Ohio. Kay says, that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. That's right. We don't. In fact, very often we don't agree on things. And Kay says, Ohio still sucks. Okay, Kay.
Say goodnight.
Okay, I'll certainly agree on that. So Bonnie is telling me to say goodnight. So I am going to say goodnight. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for a fun discussion tonight. Don't forget my Patreon account. It's right up there, right near my face now. So I hardly ever have to mention it. Do go to my Patreon account, okay, occasionally. Thank you. Good night. Oh, Avril says night.